While journalists, human rights organizations, and activists are fighting a battle to expose Israel's oppression of Palestinians, there's another group in the country that's also attacked and imprisoned: those of African descent. A major rationale given for the existence of Israel is that it serves as a refuge for those who face the horrors of the Holocaust, part of making sure the words "never again" hold true. So it might come as a surprise to some that Israel is building prison camps for and legislating laws against people fleeing genocide today. When European countries tightened restrictions on refugees, it became increasingly difficult for asylum seekers to escape war and persecution. As camps filled up throughout the African continent, many started crossing the Sinai Desert into Israel. Today, there are about 45,000 African refugees inside Israel's borders, less than 0.5% of its population. But despite their minuscule size relative to the population, they're treated as a national crisis in Israeli society. Likud member of parliament Miri Regev stated from the stage of an anti-refugee rally, "The Sudanese are a cancer in our body." Interior Minister Eli Yishai claimed that African refugees were raping many Israeli women, who do not complain because they don't want people to know they were also given AIDS. He also stated Israel belongs to the white man. An Israeli police station in Tel Aviv also officially honored May Golan, a leader of anti-African campaigns that encourage violent attacks. And this incitement does indeed work. Just in November 2016, an innocent Sudanese man was beaten to death while walking home from work. The racism runs so deep, babies are even attacked. One man tried to murder a 1-year-old baby girl from Eritrea by stabbing her in the head. 92% of them are from just 2 countries, Sudan and Eritrea. Those escaping Sudan are fleeing ethnic cleansing and genocide in a vicious civil war. Ironically, the Israeli government has directly fueled this bloody conflict with weapons and more. Many of the refugees I spoke with told me they barely made it out alive. Similarly, refugees from Eritrea face dire conditions, one of the poorest, starvation-ridden countries in the world. Many Eritreans face mandatory conscription to slave-like conditions, imprisonment and execution by their government. Most who crossed the Egyptian border settled down in Tel Aviv or nearby cities, began working the lowest-paid jobs in restaurants and hotels, and started a new life for their families. While Israeli politicians and police try to create a picture of skyrocketing crime and chaos as a result of these neighbors, they amount to the same type of sensationalized manipulation we see from Trump and the alt-right media in America today. In fact, a report by Israeli Parliament's own research center revealed that African refugees are dramatically less likely to be involved in crime than Israeli citizens. Where African refugees are most concentrated, they account for less than 1% of reported crime. But the campaign of vitriol against them is fierce. Netanyahu even made it clear that African refugees pose a threat to the demographic of Israel as a white Jewish state. Israel is a small country, and we do not have the geographic and demographic depths to absorb them. We will not allow Israel to be flooded with illegal migrants and terrorists. With so many politicians openly calling to expel these so-called infiltrators and whipping up xenophobic hatred against refugees, we went to an anti-refugee rally in Tel Aviv, where demonstrators burned an effigy of the mayor for allowing the children of refugees into local schools.
And I'm a member of the Labour Party, and I consider myself left-wing, and I support this struggle because I think it's fair and it's just. They've come here with their practices and with their multitude of problems, and this cannot coexist. They must be removed en masse from here.
What are you doing?
I'm here, traveling around.
You present somebody?
Huh?
You cannot get inside.
What does that sign? What does that mean?
It says no permission to bypass a non-permitted way of staying. It's not, kids are not visa.
So you want them to just stop breeding, yeah?
This is not what I'm saying. If you stay inside the country, not in a rightful way, kids are not meant to bypass that. This is what we're saying.
But doesn't use a condom mean literally stop having sex? Like stop giving birth?
I don't talk about condoms. I'm saying do not
holding a child with a sign that says use a condom.
And their lives have become actually a hell.
Why is that?
Because of all the illegal immigrants.
What are they doing to make your lives hell?
Crime, noise.
Been smuggled through the border and trying to get a better job.
Well,
And then they're saying they are refugee. They are law defined as refugee.
Do you think that? But I mean, isn't Eritrea like one of the worst countries for human rights in the
No,
world?
actually, Eritrea is a beautiful country.
It is.
Yeah.
I came here to support their struggle.
To support the struggle
Against the Eritrea, the struggle against the Eritrea to take them back home to Mother Africa.
Against the why do they have to make our life so miserable? We have enough problems with Arabs and
These struggles against those people, it's not about racism or it's not about hateness. It's just about that it's not their home. They should to go to any country in Africa.
it's not racism because I don't see them as inferior to me. Racism is when I see someone inferior. I don't see them inferior, but I see them as criminals.
And these infiltrators are filthy, and they bring us only trouble.
So what have they done? Tell me about what they've done to you. You said that they.
Look, I've never passed any violence by them, but I especially train on self-defense. I hit boards, trees. Some trainer hits me to
Yeah.
So because I know that someday I will pass violence by them.
They have to go back to the country. They made enough money. Everyone who worked here can be a millionaire there in Eritrea. Go back to your country.
Well, how do you do that, though?
How do you do it? We take them with chains and put them on boats.
The racist opinions at this rally are not fringe. According to a 2012 study by the Israeli Democracy Institute for Peace, a stunning 52% of Israelis concur that African migrants are a cancer. Furthermore, the study revealed that a shocking 33% of Israelis condone anti-migrant violence. This racism is also codified into Israeli law. The refugees they target are legitimate asylum seekers, having submitted proper paperwork proving they are fleeing execution based on political persecution. In the rest of the world, over 80% of Eritrean asylum seekers are granted asylum. In Israel, less than 1% have been approved. In the past 6 years, only 4 Eritreans and 0 Sudanese have had their asylum cases approved. Instead, Israel has rounded up and deported thousands of them, even sending them back with the knowledge they could be killed upon return. This heartless act is a clear violation of international law under the UN Refugee Convention. As public pressure mounted, in 2013, Israel completed a massive 140-mile fence along the entirety of its border with Egypt in the attempt to stop African migration. And it worked. Now the trip is so dangerous, very few attempt it. They use the Prevention of Infiltration law, which allows for the detention of migrants for up to 1 year without trial. While once permitted, African refugees are now forbidden to either work or live in Israel's major cities. Today, the Israeli government has an ultimatum to African refugees. Leave now, even offering a one-way plane ticket home or to another undisclosed African country and $3,500 cash, or go to prison. With most choosing Israeli prison over certain death after deportation, Israel has built a massive prison camp in the middle of the Negev desert. I visited what even some Israeli officials have called a concentration camp on the outskirts of Israel, in the middle of the blazing desert. On one side, the Holot camp, where African asylum seekers are sent after being rounded up in Israel's cities. The camp houses over 2,000 people at a time and sentences them to 1-year intervals in inhumane conditions. Men only are rounded up to be detained in these centers. They're separated from their spouses and children. Across the street is Saharan prison, where they're sent if they violate curfew or refuse to self-deport upon release. While not technically incarcerated at Holot, they are restricted to this tightly packed camp. It is the largest prison of its kind in any industrialized nation. The Israeli government's stated intention is to arrest and send all African asylum seekers to this camp, deport them to the nightmare they escaped, and prevent any new refugees from entering. If the refugees protest, which they have many times, their makeshift encampments are bulldozed and they are attacked by militarized police forces. I visited this camp and spoke to Ali, a Sudanese refugee in prison there.
And in 2003, when the war broke down in Darfur, my village was completely burned. Janjaweed and militia group. A lot of us flee the persecution and genocide from Darfur. As one of the victims that I escaped from Darfur, I make my way to Southern Sudan first. And I stayed for a couple of years there. Then been there until 2011 after Southern Sudan became the state from Sudan as an independent nation. There was a lot of problems there. I was like attending university, and then my university was, completely shift from Southern Sudan to North. And as an active from Darfur, I was persecuted, put in prison for long times. If I were there, I would be in prison for life. That's why I also escaped from Khartoum to Egypt. Sudanese government and Egyptian, they working in corporate to get those people back to Sudan. Immediately you will be in prison. Some of us chose to come to Israel, not meaning that we wanted to stay, but we are escaping for our life. We saw that Israel is one of the countries that we can survive as the country that experienced the genocide in its history. Unfortunately, that wasn't what we sought. I arrived in the late 2011 in Israel. I've been in this prison, which is a Zahronim prison, for a month.
Why were you in prison? You were a refugee.
Unfortunately, yes, but that wasn't the idea of Israeli people.
Yeah.
That's the only idea that we know why we are coming. But they didn't give us the time to tell them that we are refugee, we are asylum seekers, we are seeking asylum for our life. We've been in prison. Today is also we're still in prison. They think that we are infiltrators or migrant workers. And that is how we are in prison. There is military maneuvers, conflicts going on. Like today in the morning, like there is like training or like artillery bombing, and everybody is working like in the morning. Nobody's going to sleep sometimes. It's really hard.
Hard for someone who just escaped an insane war zone. What did you feel when you got that paper saying you were moving here?
They built first, they said like you have to be in Cholot in like indefinite time. So everybody came to prison. First people they attend here, they stayed more than 2 years. Yeah, because the time, like they said, you are going to be in Cholot indefinite, or you have to sign voluntarily to leave the country. And then the people who cannot go anyway, they just accepted and they came to prison.
You were saying that there was a market out here that was demolished.
It is the food inside is really bad. That food is really hard. It's really bad. A lot of people they try to bring things from the Java, which is 60 kilometers away from here, and to cook and to make their life to survive. But still, they demolish. Like small marketing that people just only want to survive.
Why would they demolish you guys just cooking market food?
They said you have to make African asylum seekers' life hard so that they voluntarily leave the country. And the minister, Ali Shai, officially said, we have to make their life miserable so that voluntarily leave the country. Anyway, like for me, I'm not gonna go anyway. Feed me whatever you want. That is because I cannot go to genocide.
Right.
As long as you're not committing genocide. I want to stay prison. I'm here.
While many Israelis claim it's about illegal immigration, not their African descent, there are around 80,000 European immigrants living in Israel illegally who face no such repercussions. And it's not just black refugees who are oppressed in Israel, but black Jewish Israeli citizens. Israeli public relations often touts its inclusion of Ethiopian Jews as proof the country isn't racist at all, but rather diverse and multinational. However, their actual status in society tells a different story. Despite existing as an official state since 1948, Israel didn't start welcoming Ethiopian Jews to settle on its borders until 1973, with a decree from a Sephardic rabbi who said they were now truly Jewish. This created the incentive for tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews to flee to Israel to escape persecution and war in their home country. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Israel carried out rescue operations that flew thousands of Jews out of Ethiopia. But the decree that they were truly Jewish wasn't enough for Israeli society. Ethiopian Jewish children were sent to Orthodox boarding schools because Israeli rabbinic authorities decided they were not Jewish enough and thought their parents too primitive to know what a so-called proper Jewish upbringing should be. Today there are around 140,000 Ethiopian Jewish citizens living in Israel, less than 2% of the population. Similar to Palestinian citizens of Israel, this minority group is marginalized and segregated. Ethiopian immigrants suffer exponentially higher poverty and unemployment rates than that of native Israelis. Over 50% of all Ethiopian families live below the poverty line. A 2012 report by the Israeli Ministry of Immigrant Absorption found that 41% of Ethiopian adults who had migrated to Israel in the last decade were unemployed. On average, they earn 1/3 less than Israeli citizens. The Israeli government doesn't only have laws institutionalizing this discrimination against African Jews and refugees. It also participates in eugenics programs against them. Despite denying it for years, in 2013, the Israeli government admitted it had been administering Depo-Provera birth control injections to Ethiopian women without their consent, in an utter violation of personal sovereignty. A journalist who interviewed 35 Ethiopian immigrants found they were threatened into taking the shots while being held in transit camps. One Ethiopian woman named Emma Wyash said, "We said we won't have the shot. They told us if you don't, you won't go to Israel. You won't get aid or medical care. We were afraid. We didn't have a choice, so we accepted the injection. It was only with their permission that we were allowed to leave." Some were even told unless they received the injection, they would be barred from the country forever. The birth rate among Israel's Ethiopian population dropped a stunning 50% from 2002 to 2012 as a result of this eugenics program. But that's not all. There are even gangs that exist to attack Israelis in interracial relationships. A very revealing poll found that only 25% of white Israelis would permit a child to marry an Ethiopian Jew. Even less would live in a majority Ethiopian neighborhood. Other than Palestinians, of course, Ethiopian Jews are the most vulnerable to police abuse and incarceration. They make up just 2% of the population, yet comprise over 20% of the youth prison population. In 2016, the Israeli police commissioner told the Israeli Bar Association that it was natural to suspect Ethiopian Jews of criminality. We were in Tel Aviv in the aftermath of the announcement and followed an impromptu rally in front of the police commissioner's house. One of the rally organizers was Tehune Maharat, whose cousin was murdered in a suspected hate crime by Israeli police.
תרביצו להם, תעצרו אותם, תקללו אותם, תתייחסו אליהם בצורה הכי משפילה והכי גזענית שיש. למה? כי הם שחורים, כי הם נמצאים במקום הלא נכון, בזמן הלא נכון, וכמובן, הם כנראה גם בצבע הלא נכון מבחינתו. אנחנו נתקלים בחומה, באטימות של המשטרה, של מדיניות של הממשלה, של אפילו האזרחים, התושבים, השכנים שלי, האנשים שהם חלק ממני, שאיתם גדלתי, ורוב חיי אני חיה פה. זאת אומרת, אמנם לא נולדתי פה, אבל גדלתי פה והתחנכתי, ופתאום אתה מרגיש שזה לא הבית שלך, כי אנשים גורמים לך לחשוב ככה, כי אנשים מתייחסים אליך ככה. אם זה במשרד הבריאות, שלקחו מהאימהות שלנו, הזריקו להם ג'נוסייד, זריקה לצמצום ילודה, שבאה ואומרת בצורה מאוד ברורה, ככה ברורה למשרד הבריאות, שאת העדה האתיופית צריך לצמצם כמה שפחות, שלא, אני לא יודעת מאיזה מניעים, אבל זה בטוח לא ממניע טהור, זה בטוח לא ממניע שאכפת להם מאיתנו, זה בא ממניע שלהם, וזה, אני אפילו ארחיק לכת, זה מזכיר אפילו את תקופת השואה, שניסו לדלל שם את הילודה והקימו שם גטאות, כמו שאצלנו פה בארץ יש גטאות של אתיופים, שכונות, ערים שלמות רק של אתיופים, שטח מסוים שרק אתיופים גרים שם, שמגיעים עולים חדשים, מעבירים אותם ישר לשם. למה? מאיזה סיבה? למה להתייחס אלינו בצורה כזאת? למה כביכול לגדר אותנו? כאילו שאנחנו מצורעים, כאילו שאנחנו מזיקים, כאילו שיש לנו איזושהי כאילו קשה שלא לחשוב שזה הכל מצבע העור. ממניעים גזעניים, לא ממשהו אחר. אי אפשר להסביר את זה, זאת אומרת, גם העניין הזה של החינוך, שיש בתי ספר, כיתות שלמות, רק של אתיופים, למה? הרי המדינה הזאת דוגלת בשוויון, בצדק, ולערבב תרבויות, ובאמת לבנות איזושהי חברה משותפת מכל מיני קיבוץ גלויות, ובשטח בפועל זה לא קורה. יש בתי ספר שיש שם כיתות רק לאתיופים, יש גנים שיש הפרדה מוחלטת, גן של אתיופים וגן של לבנים. למה? יש אנשים שנולדו כאן, חבר'ה אתיופים שנולדו כאן, ועדיין משתייכים למרכז קליטה, למשרד העלייה. זאת אומרת, אנחנו נולדנו פה, אנחנו צברים, זה שלנו כמו שזה של אחרים. אז למה להתייחס אלינו כעולים? יש דברים שקשה, רק מי שחווה את זה יכול להבין. זה מציאות שחורה במדינה לבנה. ככה. בן אדם שחור יכול להבין מה בן אדם שחור אחר מבין. בן אדם לבן לא יכול להבין מה בן אדם שחור חווה. כי הוא לא שם. ולפעמים אנחנו מרגישים שזה רק שלנו. שהמאבק הזה הוא רק של שחורים, רק של אתיופים. וזה לא נכון, זה צריך להיות של כלל החברה הישראלית. כי החברה הישראלית בכללותה, במיוחד בדרגים הכי גבוהים שלה, היא חברה גזענית. היא חברה שהתפיסה שלה היא מאוד מאוד מושרשת ומאוד אפילו סמויה בכל מיני מובנים, אבל גזענית, אין מה לעשות. וחייבים להודות בזה. והאמירות האלה של המפכ"ל אתמול רק מוכיחות.
Truly exemplifying the status of black Jews in Israel, our interview was interrupted by a white Israeli man who overheard and felt entitled to tell her she was wrong.
א' כל אני אכנס.
אתה לא תיכנס לרעיון הזה.
אני אגיד לה בצורה ידידותית, כן? אני לא נגדך. חד ושלום, יש לי המון חברים, הדרכתי בסניף של עולים מאתיופיה. כולם אוהבים אתכם.
אתה שחור?
מה זה?
אתה שחור?
לא, אני הדרכתי.
אתה שחור. אתה שחור, אתה יכול להגיד מה אני מרגישה, אתה לא יכול להגיד.
אני הדרכתי.
אז אתה טועה, אדוני. יש כל כך הרבה תחומים שבהם הקהילה פוגשת בגזענות. כמו שציינתי, משרד הבריאות, אם זה הזרקות של הג'נוסייד, אבל יש גם את זה שאנחנו מתרימים דם וזורקים לנו את הדם. הדם שלנו לא שווה. וזה קורה כבר למעלה מ-20 שנה, שהדם שלנו, כל פעם שאנחנו תורמים, הדם שלנו נזרק לפח. פשוט ככה. למה? כי כנראה הדם שלנו לא טוב. הדם שלנו שונה מאחרים, שונה מהגזע הלבן. אבל הוא כנראה גם רק טוב במלחמות. כי לצבא אנחנו טובים, אנחנו פייטרים, אנחנו הראשונים להיכנס לקרב. אבל לתרום את הדם שלנו זה לא טוב, זה לפח, אנחנו לא שווים. אנחנו שווים פחות לא יודעת, כאילו, לפעמים קשה לי לקבל את זה, אבל זו המציאות. אבל זה שלי, אני לא יכולה לברוח. זאת אומרת, זה מי שאני, ואני גאה במי שאני. זה שלי, ומה שיש פה זה שלי, ואף אחד לא יכול לקחת לי את זה. ובשביל זה אני נלחמת, אז אנחנו נלחם.
From warehousing asylum seekers to discriminating against its own citizens, the treatment of black people in Israel reveals something very important about the Zionist project. That it's not just about creating a Jewish-only state, but one that is also based on white supremacy. And more recognizing that the struggle for black lives and Palestinian lives are linked together.